All right, so get ready, because today we're diving deep into a case that honestly shocked New York City back in the day, the story of Joseph Baldi, or as the papers called him, the Queen's Creeper.
The Queen's Creeper, huh?
Yeah,
Wow.
we've got excerpts from this document all about his life and crimes, and I got to say, some of the details are pretty hard to believe. We're talking murders, missed opportunities by the system, and a whole lot of questions about how things went so wrong.
You know, what really gets me about Baldy's case, and it's something you see with some others from the same era, is how it exposed those cracks in the way we used to deal with mental illness and criminal justice. Like it wasn't this straight line to becoming a killer, and it feels like there were so many points where things could have gone in a totally different direction.
Right.
It's really something.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning then. Now, the document's a little thin on the details about Baldi's early life. We know he was born in 1941, but there's not much about his family or how he grew up. What we do know is that he started getting into trouble pretty young. Petty thefts, burglaries, that sort of thing.
See, that's an important point right there. Those early offenses, even though they're, kind of common, they can sometimes be an early sign of something, a deeper disregard for the law. It's like that saying, the child is father of the man. We can kind of see the pattern emerging there, even back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that pattern, it definitely escalated. He was in and out of Creedmoor State Hospital between 1962 and 1967 for mental health treatment. And this is where things get a little creepy. He picked up carpentry while he was there.
Oh, wow.
I mean, on the surface, it sounds like a good thing, right? Learning a trade, picking up skills.
Yeah, rehab through vocational training. Except knowing what we know now about Baldy's crimes, that carpentry skill, it takes on a whole other meaning, doesn't it? You got to wonder, did anyone at the time, see this as a red flag? Like, could these seemingly innocent skills actually be twisted into something much darker?
Yeah.
It's a thought, isn't it?
It's unsettling. And things take a tragic turn in 1970. So he's out looking for an apartment, breaks into one in Jamaica, Queens, and he stumbles across 23-year-old Areti Kulermanis. She was visiting her in-laws with her kids.
God. It just goes to show, how random these kinds of crimes can be. The brutality of it, stabbing her in the throat. I mean, it left the police scrambling for leads and the whole community terrified. You can just imagine the fear. A seemingly, motiveless murder right there in your own neighborhood.
Absolutely. And the document really highlights how frustrated the police were. Dead end after dead end. But then in 1971, things could have gone, well, completely different. Baldy's breaking into another apartment, and this time he runs into a police officer. He actually tries to shoot the officer, but the gun misfires.
Wow.
If that bullet had actually gone off.
Oh, man, that moment, that right there is crucial. It shows how a split-second decision, or in this case, a malfunction, can have massive consequences. It's like a terrifying what if. Like, had the gun not misfired, we might be talking about a totally different chain of events. But it did, and suddenly Baldi was on the radar of the law.
Yeah. He's arrested, charged with attempted murder, burglary, theft, you name it. And because of his, mental health history, he's sent to Mid-Hudson Psychiatric Hospital to wait for trial. Makes sense, right? Get him the help he needs while they're sorting out the charges.
Right, except, and this is where it really gets to you, this is one of those system breakdowns that makes you just wonder how could this happen? So he's transferred back to Creedmoor, and somehow, even though he's been indicted for attempted murder, they release him in early 72. It seems like there was a total communication failure between these institutions.
Hold on. They just let him go. Knowing he tried to kill a police officer, what were they thinking? This is where it gets me angry. I mean, how can a system that's supposed to protect us fail so badly?
It is infuriating, and what makes it worse is knowing what came next. Because Baldi didn't just go back to his old ways, it got so much worse.
This is where it gets dark. Within months, he murders 3 more women. 17-year-old Camille Preniola, 21-year-old Clara Torriello, and then just 15-year-old Deborah Yanusko. Each attack more brutal than the last.
And the details, God, they're disturbing. Like with Torriello, they found her underwear torn and slashed. It's like a window into the killer's mind. A level of rage and depravity that you can't really grasp it. And then the question becomes, could any of this have been prevented if the system hadn't failed so spectacularly? And if so, what does that say about our responsibility, to people with mental illness, but also to keeping the public safe?
We've got a lot more to go over about how he was finally caught and what happened next. But before we get into all that, I think I need a minute to just process this. It's mind-blowing that this all happened because of a communication breakdown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is heavy stuff, there's no doubt about it. But,
Yeah.
understanding how it all went wrong, that's key, right?
Yeah.
So let's get back into it. Where were we? Ah, yeah, the system dropped the ball. Baldi was back out there, and terror was back on the streets of Queens. But, his days of freedom, they wouldn't last forever.
No, you're telling me. The document mentions all these reports from women saying they were being stalked by some guy. So I guess that finally got the police's attention, huh?
Oh, absolutely. They started putting together a profile, based on what the witnesses were saying and the details from the crime scenes. And then on June 21st, 1972, two detectives, they spot this guy who matches the description just walking down the street.
Wow.
It's Baldi, so they bring him in for questioning.
You have to wonder what's going through his mind at that point, right?
Yeah.
Like, is he cocky, scared, totally out of it?
Well, here's the twist.
Oh.
He confesses.
Wow.
And I don't mean like a vague admission. He gives them detailed accounts of the murders, describes how he got into the apartments, the specifics of the killings, the whole thing. But hold on, because this is where the legal battle gets really messy. Remember, he's already been indicted for that attempted murder of the officer back in 71.
Oh, right. The one where the gun misfired?
Yeah.
So they had to deal with that before they could even, like, touch the murder charges?
Right. Exactly. And during that trial, his lawyer, he goes with the insanity plea, claims Baldi is a schizophrenic with dissociative identity disorder.
Oh, wow.
Now, for those who don't know, that basically means he's got, like, multiple personalities, right? And they argued he wasn't actually in control when he attacked the officer.
So I'm no lawyer, but it sounds like they're saying he didn't do it, his other personality did. I mean, is that even, like, a valid defense?
That's the big question, isn't it? Like, how do we determine who's really responsible when you've got mental illness in the picture? The prosecution, of course, they bring in their own expert who says, no, Baldi knew exactly what he was doing. It was like a classic battle of the shrinks. After 8 days, the jury comes back. They find him guilty of attempted murder, 25 years in prison.
So that's one down, but you still got those murder charges hanging over his head, right?
Right.
Did that first trial, did it make it easier to prosecute him for the murders?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But the legal system, well, it's rarely that simple. So the judge who's overseeing the murder cases, he decides to dismiss the charges for Coularmanis, Perniola, and Torriello.
Wait, are you serious? He dismissed them. How's that even possible?
It all came down to, like, a technicality. See, at that time, Baldi's lawyer, he was only officially representing him for the Danusco case, not the others.
Oh, wow.
The DA tried to appeal, but the document we have doesn't say what happened with that. It's one of those details that it makes you frustrated, Really shows how important the legal stuff is.
So even with those confessions, he basically walked free on 3 of the murders. That doesn't seem right.
A tough one to swallow, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the trial for Deborah Danusco's murder, that one did go ahead. And remember those detailed confessions I was talking about? Well, now Baldi's saying he doesn't remember confessing at all.
Oh, come on.
His defense, they doubled down on the insanity plea, bring in psychiatrists, all these records from the institutions, trying to paint a picture of this, deeply disturbed mind.
So it's basically his word against, a recording of his confession.
Mm-hmm.
How do you even argue with that?
Well, that's exactly what the prosecution did. They argued, look, the confessions are clear. He gave them willingly. He was of sound mind. And this time, the judge sides with the prosecution. Rules that Baldi was sane when he killed Janusco.
Wow.
Another guilty verdict. Another 25 to life sentence, which he'd serve at the same time as the first one.
So at least he was finally held accountable for one of those awful murders. But it still feels like, a hollow victory, knowing he might have gotten away with the other 3 because of a technicality.
Yeah, and that's where the public outrage comes in. This wasn't just like some abstract legal case, This was about real people, real families who were destroyed by these crimes. People were furious. This guy, who clearly had a history of violence, of instability, he was released not once, but twice. And they let him keep killing. It made people question the whole system.
I mean, can you blame them? It makes you wonder how many other cases like this are out there. How many times has the system messed up and failed to protect people because of, oversights like this?
And Baldi's case wasn't unique. You had Charles Uckel, Ricardo Caputo, other cases in New York around the same time where guys who were supposedly rehabilitated went on to commit more crimes after they were released. It started a huge debate across the country about mental health, the justice system, how we balance public safety with individual rights.
Those are big, big questions. And I have to admit, I'm still stuck on the fact that Baldi might have gotten away with 3 murders just because of a legal technicality. It's hard to wrap your head around that.
Yeah, it's a tough one to let go of, isn't it? That feeling of injustice. But I guess even beyond the specifics of Baldy's case, there's this bigger question that we haven't really touched on. What happens next? Like, what's the lasting impact of something like this?
You're right. You're absolutely right. Baldy's case, and you've got Euclid and Caputo too. They really became these like flashpoints for the public. People started demanding answers.
Yeah.
How could this happen? What went wrong in the system that allowed these tragedies to happen? And most importantly, what could we do to make sure it never happened again?
It's like someone pulled back the curtain and everyone saw those cracks in the system. Just
Sure.
raw and dangerous. So did anything change? Like, were there any actual reforms or changes to policies because of these cases? Oh yeah, there was definitely a push for change. Like, one of the first things that happened was this call for much stricter release protocols, especially for people with a history of violence, and those who were considered mentally unfit to stand trial. The thinking was, if we can't really predict if someone's going to be dangerous in the future, then we need to be extra careful, right? Like, keep anyone who might be a threat off the streets.
Yeah, that makes sense if you just go with your gut, protect the public,
Yeah.
whatever it takes. But I bet there were some people who saw that as like messing with individual rights, right? Where do you draw the line?
Exactly, exactly. That's the core of it, isn't it? On the one hand, you've got this totally legitimate worry about public safety. And on the other, you've got the rights of the individual, innocent until proven guilty. And then the possibility of these rules that are just too broad that could end up hurting people who might never commit another crime. It's a real balancing act, ethically and legally.
And how do you even define dangerousness? That seems so, I don't know, subjective, open to interpretation. Couldn't these stricter rules end up catching people who aren't actually a threat?
That's the million-dollar question. Baldy's case and those others, they really made everyone take a hard look at the limitations of psychiatric evaluations, how hard it is to predict what someone's going to do, and the huge responsibility that institutions have to, treat people but also keep everyone safe. It's a tough situation with incredibly high stakes.
Yeah. We're starting to see how this case wasn't just about one man and the crimes he committed. It really opened up all these issues about mental health and the justice system, issues that we're still dealing with now.
For sure, it sparked this national conversation about how we as a society deal with these complicated situations. How do we make sure that people with mental illness get the treatment they need, but also, protect the public? There's no easy answer. And every case has its own challenges.
Right. So as we wrap up this deep dive, uh, what are some of the key takeaways that you hope our listeners will walk away with? What should we be thinking about as we try to deal with these issues?
Well, first of all, we got to remember how important communication and collaboration are. Remember, with Baldy, it was that failure to communicate between the institutions that led to him being released. And then, those terrible things happened. We need systems that really work, where information can be shared easily between law enforcement, mental health professionals, the courts, everyone involved. No more working in isolation, no more letting things slip through the cracks.
Right. Close those gaps, connect the dots. Sounds so easy, but I guess it's not always that simple in real life, is it?
It's something we have to keep working at constantly. We also need to fight for more funding for research, treatment, and support services for people struggling with mental illness. That means better care inside institutions, but also more resources out in the community to help people reintegrate and reduce the risk of them reoffending. We need to attack this from multiple angles.
And it's got to be a commitment from all of us, right?
Yeah.
Not just lawmakers and people making policies, but everyday citizens. We all have to demand better from the systems that are supposed to be there to protect us.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Baldy's case is this harsh reminder that we can always do better, we can learn from the past, and we can push for policies that put justice and compassion first.
Yeah. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and it's been tough at times. But I think it's important to remember that we're not talking about abstract ideas here. These are real lives, real families who were affected by these events.
Exactly. And I think it's worth leaving our listeners with this thought. Could these kinds of tragedies ever be completely prevented? Or is there always going to be some level of risk that we as a society just have to learn to deal with? There's no easy answer, and that's why it's so important to keep having these conversations, keep learning, keep pushing for progress.
Really powerful stuff. We've only just scratched the surface here, and I would encourage all of you listening to keep digging, keep learning, and come to your own conclusions.
Knowledge is power,
Yeah.
The more we understand about these complex issues, the better chance we have of actually making a difference.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep asking those questions keep exploring, and keep the conversation alive.